While I was still working with Thomas, still reading through the library of Catholic material, still building my case against Marian apparitions, I finally did something that I should have done years earlier. I researched my angel encounter using the Bible itself. Not the theology around angels, not the pop culture depictions, the actual biblical descriptions of how God appears to people. And you have to understand, for over 15 years, one detail had haunted me about the encounter when I was 16. The being that spoke to me wasn't bathed in light. It wasn't glowing or radiant or peaceful. It was shrouded in darkness, a small, dense, dark cloud wrapped around a form I couldn't see. And it was terrifying. And that had always troubled me. Because isn't God supposed to be light? Isn't darkness the domain of the enemy? How could a messenger from God come wrapped in a shadow? A cloud, a dark cloud at that. I'd use that question as a reason to doubt, to hold the experience at arm's length, to wonder if maybe I had been deceived by something pretending to be holy. But now, with Thomas pushing me to engage seriously with Scripture and finally opening the Bible, I also went to Blue Letter Bible and searched for the word darkness. What I found broke my soul. It was on 1 Kings 8:12. Then spake Solomon, the Lord said that he would dwell in thick darkness. The Hebrew term for darkness was araphel. It means heavy cloud, thick darkness, gross darkness, or a dark cloud. So I pressed a little bit more and looked for just cloud, which is anon. I'm probably pronouncing those wrong, but that's how it looks when you spell it out. So what I found was Exodus 19:9. And the Lord said unto Moses, Lo, I come unto thee in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with thee, and believe thee forever. And Moses told the words of the people unto the Lord. And then Exodus 14:19. And the angel of God went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them, and the pillar of the cloud went from before their face and stood behind them. This wasn't poetic metaphor. This wasn't symbolic language. Throughout Scripture, when God showed up, actually showed up, he came wrapped in darkness. But also, his angel was sent as a cloud too. Just like what I had seen. Writing this part's hard because just as I stood before that entity at 16 thinking, no, don't let this be true, I found myself saying it aloud as I looked at these verses. I had hoped to find something that would let me dismiss my experience, something that would prove the being in darkness couldn't have been from God. Because if it was real, then I could stop carrying the weight of it. I could stop feeling the fear that washed over me every time I remembered that night. I could believe that maybe it was something completely different that affected Afton, and that's why she died. But here, I found confirmation. So when I was doing this, I was still working as a security guard on a weekend when no one was there, except for on occasion when Thomas would show up. And so on the floor, in front of all these computers, where I'm supposed to be watching and making sure that nobody's trespassing on the property, I fell to my knees. I begged forgiveness for all the years I had doubted, for all the times I had used that darkness as an excuse to wander, for every moment I had told myself the angel might have been a deception when Scripture itself testified otherwise. The angel had been real, the message had been real, and I had spent nearly 2 decades running from it. Still, all I had was a Bible, no church. And so I tried again. I tried a couple of churches over the week just to see what I felt. And finally, I went to the Catholic church that Thomas attended, thinking maybe there was something there. All I found was a feeling, and I kind of wrote it off as nostalgia. Just a flood of feeling at peace in the room. The comfort of dipping my fingers into the water and making the sign of the cross. When I sat at the pew and prayed, I tried asking God, if this is where you want me, can you have someone, anyone, acknowledge that I'm in the room? But no one came. And I walked out, got into my car, and just cried. Again, no church. So I went back to the Bible, studying on my own. Occasionally Thomas would come in and we'd have the argument again. You're Catholic. No, I'm not. You're Catholic. A week before the next gathering, I met up with my mom on vacation. And while we were together, my mother had a dream. I don't know why she had it then or why the timing lined up the way it did, but she came to me in the morning and described what she had seen. It was the amphitheater. Now, by this point, I hadn't been in that dream for a couple of years. But this was my amphitheater. Everything she described, mine. Same one from that recurring dream. The place where I had stood several times over, the previous 20 years, watching people connected to suicide gathering in pooling water while a fisherman cast his line where there were no fish. Except, in her dream, the players were different, and the water below was gone. The amphitheater was dry. The fisherman wasn't there, and there were people that were mocking what I was doing. Not me specifically. Somehow she figured it had something to do with me. And when she woke up, she felt like it was a warning that someone or something was coming after me. I shrugged it off. I was pretty used to people coming after me in the online community. You're not in a community for almost 20 years without a target getting painted on your back. I believed her. After all, it was strange that she somehow had my dreamscape, a place I had never described to her, but I told myself, if something's coming, I'll just deal with it. I didn't know how right she was, and I'm not sure if she was talking about God's coming for me or the person that ultimately ended up being a catalyst for something I never expected. The gathering was in 2021. We had to postpone it a year because of COVID, but finally we were able to come together again. The online community I'd been part of for so long. Gabriel was being put up for his master trial. It was a ceremony to gauge whether he was ready for the next tier, a master rank in our community. I was supposed to lead it with 4 people assigned to quote-unquote grade Gabriel's answers to the 4 questions. So prior to all this, when I asked Gabriel if he wanted to invite his gods, Andean deities, to be part of the ceremony, he said yes. I told him I'd honor his request, but I wasn't going to call them in myself. Instead, I'd let 4 graders choose whether to engage with the deity that matched their question. The first night we arrived, Cade, a student of mine who identified with the Norse pantheon, came to me with a problem. He told me Holden was spreading confusion about how the ceremony was supposed to work. Holden apparently was telling people that the 4 graders were supposed to invoke the gods they'd been asked to meditate upon. And that wasn't what I had said at all. In fact, I didn't even want them inside of the ceremony. All I wanted was, if you are okay with talking with them, grader, then you can talk with them, but before the ceremony. So I called everyone together and I clarified and I said, I don't want you bringing the gods you never worked with in. Meditate on their stories. If you choose, ask them what they would expect Gabriel to answer, but do not invoke them. I was not having that. Later, Holden admitted to me that he had invited the god he chose, Supe, a god of the inner world, to be partially invoked. Of course, this was long after this gathering. That would matter later. The next morning, Gabriel led a shamanic journey. We were supposed to meet our spirit guides. I almost didn't attend, not wanting to offend my god, but something tugged at me, and my journey took an unexpected turn. I found myself at the cave in Okinawa where I'd first met Aurora. I slid down the stream, next to the cave, down to the ocean, and then found myself traveling with a pod of dolphins. Finally, I arrived at the staff that Flint and I had left at the end of the jetty during the Samhain ceremony all those years ago. As I touched it, brilliant light filled the ocean, and I was transported back to the room with everyone else. I didn't know what it meant, but something was stirring. Everybody else, they were all in the same space. I was the only one that had gotten taken elsewhere. Like we're saying, they all kind of saw each other's spirit guides, so to speak. But I was taken completely somewhere else, so I had no idea what to make of this. Then came my workshop. I need to give you some context first, though. Things that would come into play for this workshop that I missed until the damage was already done. So Holden's wife, Ingrid, had been raped, and I had knowledge of this fact. Years earlier, during a previous relationship, she was raped by a guy that she ended up leaving and then got involved with Holden. Of course, what I didn't know is that after she found her strength to leave, Ingrid had cast a curse on the man, her ex, who had raped her. A curse intended to kill him. And about a week before this gathering, probably around the same time my mother had her dream, Holden and Ingrid found out that the curse had not worked, that he was still alive, and Ingrid found out because she had been invited to a party being thrown in his honor. Apparently, also during this whole time, she was going around and talking about how she was a death witch and trying to lean in on that as part of her identity. I didn't know about that either until hours after what happened. So, just days before the gathering, when Holden and Ingrid had stayed at my apartment, we had finally moved out of the trailer in 2020. I had reached out to touch Ingrid's shoulder to get her attention, and she recoiled so badly it startled me. Her body still kept the score of that trauma, even years later. I should have remembered that, but I didn't until it was too late. The workshop was about letting go. You would draw a piece of paper from a bag randomly and contemplate how it related to something keeping you from your life's purpose. And then you would release that thing under a waterfall. Of course, this is linked specifically to how the divine sees that. So we started with a thought experiment. We had 3 bags, one with the 10 Commandments for Christians, one with pagan ethical laws, and one for the Buddhist Eightfold Path, because I wasn't going to go beyond 3 bags. It's too much work. Too many things I've got to print out. So then you draw randomly and consider, why did the people who created this law believe that violating it would separate them from the divine? Holden and Ingrid drew from the pagan bag. Of course they did. Somehow, completely randomly, they both pulled ethical laws about not selling the craft. Now, they were running, and still do, run a pagan shop together. As one might imagine, they struggled with these questions, but they formed answers to why the people who designed these laws would think it would take you away from the divine. Then came the second bag. These were tenets held by our spiritual community, part of our rule set, things that we ask you not to violate. The instruction was, let intuition guide your hand, draw a paper, and consider how this tenet reveals that you are personally detached from the divine and how it is preventing you from achieving your life's purpose. In that moment, Holden remembered all the tenets and he panicked. And he said, Dana, Ingrid, neither of you need to be participating in this if you don't want to. Dana, being the wife of another person down here, and then there was another person who was not a Jedi either, but they didn't name them off. They only named off 2 women. I didn't understand at the time what Holden was doing, because Holden also had a habit of trying to take over when I was leading things. I didn't see it as him trying to protect his wife. I just saw him stepping on my role again. If he had said, Ingrid alone, I might have noticed it. I might have recognized it, but I didn't. So I said, no, if they're down here, they should participate. So they meditated. Holden seemed to be the last one still working through his answers, and I asked if anyone needed more time. He took a moment and he said yes, and he pulled me aside. You don't tell a rape victim they have to do something, he said. And that's when I realized what I had done. I didn't know Dana was also a survivor. Holden explained that later, but in that moment I understood the damage was already done. I couldn't call attention to Ingrid now without making it worse. Everyone else still needed the chance to release their burdens at the waterfall, and that was the whole point of the story. So if I stop it now, they don't get that. I tried to help Holden refocus. I asked him, do you trust Ingrid's strength? Yeah. Do you trust your gods? Seconds later, I would ask myself, why did I even ask that? I don't trust his gods. But he responded, yes. Then here's how this works. No one has to share what they discovered. They can keep it to themselves. So we continued the workshop. I told everyone they could pass when I called on them. I called on Ingrid third, and she yelled at me. And frankly, then and even now, I feel like that was fair. Most others in the group didn't think so, but I do, and I think that matters more. Then she stormed off, and Holden went next. He let out how furious he was with me. He told me that by the time the sun went down, we would likely not be friends anymore because I didn't protect his wife. Then he chased after his wife. As he passed by me, he also passed my friend Hope. Hope said that she felt a wave of emotional energy come off of him so strong it knocked her backwards, and it did. He never touched her. It was just from the energy. Now, what's interesting about this is that she had always said she couldn't feel energy the way others claimed to, and this was the first time she ever had, and that tells you how charged he was. I didn't chase after him. I remembered in that moment how Ingrid had recoiled from me just days before. Following her felt like it would cause more trauma, and everyone else still needed the chance to let go of whatever was weighing them down. There was no one there at this particular iteration of the waterfall workshop that could have taken my place. So, after I helped them through their release by using my conch shell to pour water over them, I tried to climb off the rocks by the waterfall, and I slipped. I did everything I could to keep my shell from hitting the rock, but it hit anyway. Of course, at first I thought it was fine. It wasn't until later, after the third waterfall, which we'll get to here soon, that I realized there was a chip in the mouthpiece. I had told 2 people as tears started forming at the fireplace when I saw it. It means Holden and I will never be friends again. When I got back to the cabin, I tried to see if I could talk to Holden and Ingrid to apologize. I was approached by another attendee that we'll name Celeste, who told me that it was best to walk by them with my tail between my legs. I figured Celeste knew better about the situation and how it looked, so I did what she told me to. After all, she was there, and I was just now coming back up. And really, when I looked at the body language, I could see they were very agitated. Later on, Holden would tell me it was because he felt I should have chased after them instead of continuing the workshop. With this in mind, I needed to refocus, though. There were intended to be 3 iterations of the waterfall workshop, and that meant there was one more needed. Maybe by the time I got done with it, things would have cooled off enough that we could talk again. I tried to ask Gabriel to lead it, but after taking a moment to meditate, and he didn't really know the full story, he told me the spirits were saying I needed to lead it instead. So I did, but I also had Gabriel come down to help me be a participant, something we had already planned on weeks before. So when it came my turn to draw, my heart sank. The paper didn't say the exact words that came to me, but the sentiment was there. And the message spoke to my soul, and it was clear. Commit to divine law. I called Gabriel over, still broken. Am I understanding this right? That I need to commit to divine law? This was just another blow right after Holden and Ingrid. And he closed his eyes and he considered it and said yes as he nodded. A decision had to be made. I thought about all those years, all the times other gods had reached out to me wanting to engage, and how God of the Bible had only seemed to speak when it was to pull me back from hurting someone. He never gave me guidance. He never led me away from temptation. He just let it fall on me over and over again. And the one thing I had asked for, all I had asked for, a church, he had never given it to me. Standing under that waterfall, I did what the Israelites did at Mount Sinai while waiting for Moses. I let Christianity fall from my hands. I prayed to God and I told him why. The reason I was giving up was because he never gave me a church. That's all I had ever wanted. A community that could show me the way forward. If he had just given me that, I could have followed his divine law. But he hadn't done it. So I would seek a different pantheon. I told Gabriel that this would take me time to let go. He'd need to turn the conch shell over me, likely more times than anyone else. I kept trying to let it go, and then when he got to 5, I asked, "Is this 5?" And he said yes. And I made the decision I needed to let the paper fall at 6. Because that's the number of man's fall. If I couldn't let go before this, then the number it took should also have the weight of symbolism that the decision held. I needed to let go at 6. Cade stopped me from getting up afterwards, and he said, "My gods are telling me that I need to do this one more time." And now a 7th helping from Cade's hands flowed from the shell and watched over me. I couldn't tell you the significance of that. I can tell you that 7 is the number of spiritual completion, though, but it's also the number of rest. For God rested on the 7th day. Maybe it was a foreshadowing, or maybe it was symbolizing a completion of my journey from the angel to now. I really don't know. Didn't know then, don't know now. And that's even after this whole thing pretty much has a very good conclusion. So what I do know is that when I came back from the 3rd waterfall, I tried 3 times to apologize to Holden and Ingrid. The first time, Holden was not open to talking. The second time, I bowed on my kaiken, a blade I had bought and I wore at my wedding. It's a symbol of the deepest apology I could offer. He told me it was too late. So instead of giving the apology verbally, I used it as an opportunity to ask him to let his best friend, Cain, take his place in the ceremony. And then the 3rd time, Gabriel mediated, and Holden said his piece. I tried to apologize 4 times during that conversation, and he just wouldn't accept it. So again, after failed attempts, I asked, we can't be in the circle together when we're like this. Please just give your role to Cain. I gave up. Maybe at some future date we could try the apology again, but it hurt. This time, Gabriel fully understood that I was right, and something needed to be done about his ceremony. He almost called it off entirely, but Holden talked him into continuing. Gabriel asked me if I was willing to accept his resolution, and I agreed. And so he explained, Cain will take your place as master of ceremony, and you are going to take Holden's place as one of the graders. So I agreed. I had already told him I would take his resolution. Okay, got it. I asked for one final clarification, given everything, even in my broken state. Well, do you still Want your gods invited? I'm willing to step into the role. He thought about it for a moment and said, yeah, they need to be present. Now, I didn't know it then, but he had actually planned on using this as an opportunity to say goodbye to his gods as he prepared for a more eclectic journey. After eating dinner, I needed to prepare. So I took a cup of tea and walked down to a creek on the property, not far from our circle. I sat in meditation, trying to connect with Supe, the god Holden had chosen to go with this question: how will you defend them when you are no longer able? I tried to say this god's name in my head, and then I got a response. It came after a couple of minutes. If you want my attention, you need to call out my name. So I stammered, Supe? Listen, I'm terrified of you. I'm not gonna lie. But you probably knew you were invited to the party, so here we are. And then a wave of calm washed over me. Not peace about what had happened with Ingrid. I still felt horrible about that. But ease with Supe himself. He told me what he expected from Gabriel, and we found ourselves aligned with what we expected. When the ceremony came, I entered the circle to take my place. But as I entered, Supe took control of my body and control of the question to Gabriel, calling him even by his pagan name, Angelus. Gabriel was taken aback for a moment, realizing he was not talking to me, but talking to a god, and now he needed to stand his ground. He answered the question, and Supe bowed, letting him go on his way. The moment I stepped out, Supe was gone, almost causing me to stumble. As I walked back up the hill with Gabriel, I told him, maybe I've been wrong about the gods? Supe was oddly kind. Gabriel didn't say anything to that. Instead, he just commented, odd, I feel Odin is present. When I got home, I found a secluded place and tried to see if I could still blow into my conch shell. Not only could I do this, but it was easier to get the correct angle to make the mouthpiece work. And that hurt because it meant that I was right. Holden, a person I had talked daily with for hours on the phone, was never truly going to be my friend again. Still, I held out that maybe I was wrong about that, and I was reading too much from the shell. But as time went on, turned out that I wasn't. Still, we tried. A few weeks later, Holden and I talked again, and I was able to apologize to him and his wife. And we talked about the whole Supe situation, and that's when I had learned that he had actually told Supe that he was going to invoke him in the circle. Well, after that conversation, I never told Holden this, but I understood the message of the shamanic journey earlier in the gathering. I had told everyone the day before that I didn't want them invoking a god they had never worked with. But because of Flint's Samhain ceremony, I had technically worked with this death god. Interesting how that works, right? Well, maybe the gods conspired to make this come about. Maybe it was a setup for the next leg of the journey. But still, I hold that the mistake at the waterfall was mine alone, without being controlled to make the decision. At the same time, all it takes is for someone to move a chess piece one way for everything to fall into place. And if there was a chess piece that was moved, it was likely an influence to encourage either Dana or Ingrid to come down with their spouse, when I had only invited Holden and Dana's husband. While it may seem like I misinterpreted the conch shell, that too was right, as my relationship with Holden was incredibly strained, and it didn't last. Theologically, we were unaligned, and we couldn't make our friendship about something other than theological discussions. While he is still a part of the story moving forward, That chapter has completely ended. I'd come to that gathering still holding on to Christianity. Barely, but holding. I left, having let it fall from my hands under a waterfall, having watched a friendship crack like the chip in my shell, having felt a god of the underworld move through my body with more gentleness than I expected. I didn't know what came next. I told God I was done waiting for a church, that I was going to seek out a different pantheon, a different divine law to follow. And I didn't have an answer, I just had a ton of heartbreak and the journey ahead. I'm Alethea, and this is Wandering Sinai.